This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Thank you to all the supporters on patreon.com. If you would like an ad-free experience of the podcast, become a patron at patreon.com/gracefulatheist. If you're in the middle of doubt, deconstruction, the dark night of the soul, you do not have to go through it alone. Join our private Facebook community, Deconversion Anonymous. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. Remember, we have the merch store at TeePublic. The link will be in the show notes. Check it out for all your Graceful Atheist and Secular Grace themed items. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. Arlene interviews today's guest, MJ. MJ has a presence on Instagram at Dissident Daughters. She grew up evangelical in a focus on the family type home. She suffered through purity culture, getting married and having children very early. Later in life, she began to expand her world and she began to have her doubts. She asked questions of her pastors, specifically about the last chapter of Mark, culminating in an email to the pastor. As you can imagine, that did not go well. Now MJ considers herself a Wiccan witch. She recommends books and art on her Instagram page. You can find that at Dissident Daughters. Here is Arlene interviewing MJ.
Hi, MJ. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hello.
You and I connected over Instagram. I'm pretty sure the algorithm at some point in 2021 or 2022 suggested your account and like your book recommendations, the different art that you share, just your own personal stuff. Like, I've loved it so much. So I wanted to hear your whole story. If you would like to tell us, just start with what was the religious environment of your childhood?
Well, it was evangelical Christian, but I didn't know that because my family always called it non-denominational. So it wasn't actually until after my deconversion process that I figured out that we were evangelical, when I realized that we had mission trips going everywhere and I was trying to be the person out there evangelizing. And I'm like, oh, that's what that means. So I was raised in a very fundamentalist Christian atmosphere in which my parents rejected Catholicism that they had been raised with, moved to Colorado from different parts of the country, met each other in Colorado Springs in the 80s. And I'm sure you probably know what else was happening around that time. So they latched on to focus on the family is how we're going to do our lives. It was McGee and me. It was, homeschooling. It was don't be involved in the secular world at all. We had homeschooling circles, 4-H church. We had church on Sundays, on Mondays, on Wednesdays, on Fridays. It was try to fill up our lives so that there's nothing that can sneak its way in and kind of detract us from our mission on earth, which is to get as many people to go to heaven with us as possible. Mm-hmm. So early off, I felt the pressure of trying to convert all of my friends, anybody in my neighborhood, because those were the only friends I was allowed to really have as a homeschooler.
So your homeschooling world, these were all other homeschooling Christian families, and I'm assuming they were all white Christian families and focused on the family Christian families. You weren't exposed to even different kinds of Christianity.
Yeah, and we often didn't even meet up with the homeschool circles until the testing. We would have to do a test at the end of the year to make sure we were on par. So I would see other homeschoolers there. About once a month, my mom would try to set up some kind of like bowling or different activity with a couple other homeschoolers. And I only ever remember girls and I only remember white girls and Christian white girls. And I think that's who my mother was hoping to surround me with, because she also had this idea in her head of turning back time. And so we would watch Little House on the Prairie and talk about the prairie settler days and how beautiful and wonderful it was. And if only we could go back to courting. And so my whole life, I knew that I was never going to get to date. That was not an option. It didn't matter what age I was. I could move out, they said, and date, but it was going to be courting, and it was going to be with the intention of marriage. It's going to be with a chaperone. And so I grew up kind of thinking that was normal because I watched Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah. Wow. So high school, did you do like youth group and things like that?
I got introduced to youth group in 7th grade. It was through our church, obviously. And as I got into this group of kids, first I realized that I was boy crazy. I think being so isolated made every boy the most handsome person in the world. So it ended up being kind of I'm going to youth group to learn more about God, but I'm also like more interested in learning about boys. But now the shame of that feeling is destroying my relationship with my parents, because I feel like they would know that I'm a horrible person if they knew my real reasons for wanting to go. So just this conflict of, I want to do the right thing. I want to be here for the right reasons, but I also want to meet my future husband. So it was all this, youth group was my release. It became, such an important part of my life that my mother actually used it to punish me whenever I would mess up. She didn't really have anything else to like take from me since I was very isolated. So it would be, okay, well, you don't have youth group this week. And then it would be like, well, I have to wait until church, and we can't talk at church, and we have to sit with our parents, and I have to wear a dress and all this. And it was just a different atmosphere, the adults versus the youth. And I always felt like the youth actually cared about God. It was weird growing up and thinking that, oh, well, you sit down and you listen to a pastor, and half the time the adults fall asleep trying to listen. I assumed that's why they yell in service, to wake up anybody who might have fallen asleep.
That's a good point.
And I would just want to be a part of the youth who I thought were being, motivated, going on these retreats. Retreats were what I lived for. And then by 8th grade, my mother actually sent me to school. She sent us to a private Christian school. I think that if she had known what we were going to get into, she probably would have not made that choice. I'm grateful because my school was not white. It was very diverse, which was very interesting because they had different outposts in London, in Liberia. In fact, I would meet my first husband there, who his dad was from Liberia. His mother was from here, and they weren't allowed to marry at their church because it was an interracial relationship, and had to go back to Liberia to get married and come back here in the 80s. And so that was my first kind of introduction to outside world, but it's only from a Christian perspective. Very small classes, 15 to 30 kids per class, K through 12. And so it was a great experience to be out and around other kids, but also still closed off from, we never learned about evolution. We had Bible class. We didn't have other electives. And so it was kind of the no touching, and the purity culture is where that ended up becoming what it means to be a woman, and especially a Christian woman for me. So that was a hugely huge change in my life, but it was more of a buckle down on what we already believe a woman's worth is. So it was a really intense atmosphere. But I think that was where I began to, distance myself from my parents and realize that, I think that they wanted me to just be a wife and mother. They always talked about college. Like there was the goal of going to college. My mother put me through piano lessons for 10 years in the hopes of getting a scholarship by joining the orchestra. Which as an adult, I would ask her, often, why did you pick piano? There's only one piano in the orchestra. My sister got violin. There's 60 strings in an orchestra. I'm like, I didn't have to be the best if I got violin. I just had to be mediocre. So I did piano lessons for 10 years, quit because I hated, being in front of people. I have stage fright like nobody's business. And, so it was watching that their plan for me didn't include anything really outside of the Proverbs 31 woman, getting up to take care of my family. You can go to college, you can get a degree, but what your ultimate job is going to be is to be taking care of a family, which as a younger girl, I loved that idea. I had a dream of having 6 children, and I had them all named, and my best friend and I wrote letters to our future grooms. And it was just the atmosphere that the homeschoolers were raised in. We kind of all agreed. I didn't know that it was different from what other people were getting. I think after my 8th grade year, my mom actually decided that I was not mature enough emotionally. I think it was because she finally picked up on the boy craziness and pulled me and my sister back out of school to homeschool us for another year. That was in my freshman year in 1998 to 99, which is when Columbine happened. So in Colorado, that kind of was my 9/11 event for, I think, the rest of the world looks at 9/11 as this life shaking, oh my God, the world is bigger than we think it is. And it's more dangerous. And for me, Columbine was that. I think everybody in Colorado knew somebody who had been affected. I personally knew people who had been shot, and it was definitely one of those things where it was well, this is a community building thing. We're all coming together now. Everybody's turning to God. It was almost like this religious movement in Colorado to be turn back to faith. This will be your way back out. And so I kind of rededicated my life, tried to push hard into youth group. It was also all I had at the time because now I was out of school. And so it became more and more of my passion. Then I went back to school in 10th grade, back to that same private school where I would meet my first boyfriend, who I would end up marrying because of purity culture. We were married for about 3 years and then divorced. So I do have 2 children from that marriage. And that was such an enlightening experience of what does it mean to actually encourage your child to marry the first person they sleep with. And so just another purity culture slap in the face. This is not where it's going for me, but I transitioned from young adult or from child to adult immediately. And it was, oh, now you're a mother. So now you don't get to be a kid anymore. You're 18, but you're an adult. And so it was I'll just raise my child the same way I was raised. It worked. Church is helpful. Church will keep them out of trouble. It was kind of what I had always been taught. It's either sports or church or both if you want to make sure your kid graduates.
Wow.
And so it was a learning experience.
They make it sound so easy. Just do these things and everything will turn out great.
Oh, absolutely. Around the end of that time or ending high school, I decided I wanted to be a psychologist. And so I went to kind of a liberal school, Metro State College of Denver. It was at the time. It's now Metro University. And so I went in for a liberal, arts degree and found myself surrounded by people in social works settings being why do you vote the way you do? Why do you vote against your own interests? You're a single mother. You're this demographic. You need this assistance from the state. Why are you voting the way you do? Why do you have this certain preferences that you do? And I was always taught that it always came back to abortion. And so in my upbringing, I would be taken to abortion rallies outside, or pro-life rallies outside of abortion clinics where we would hold signs, and I would have nightmares from seeing these, fake images, of babies mutilated on people's posters. And so it was a very well, it doesn't matter what happens to me. The children matter, the children matter. And it's really hard to forgive myself for some of the indoctrination I think that I went through. But I spent years and years just saying, well, I agree with everything that this party does for the community, but the children, I can't justify doing what's right for all these people while these innocent people are being hurt. And so it became this, it's me against everybody else. Everybody hates me and not hates me. It was this perceived outcast perspective of myself. I saw that I didn't fit in, that I didn't fit into the social work setting that I was working in, and I didn't fit into the Christian circles that I found myself in church. And I found myself to just be like, is there anybody out there that thinks like me? Like, is there anybody out there who's questioning? And I found Rob Bell.
Ooh, that's a big jump.
Yeah.
From James Dobson to Rob Bell.
I think it was the title that grabbed me. I was like, that sounds different. And I really don't know what made me pick up that book, because I was not reading nonfiction at the time. I had spent my entire life being drawn to fantasy, wanting to look at books as an escape. I didn't watch a lot of television, so books were always my escape. I always would tell my kids, it's a much longer escape, because you can be lost for days or weeks in a novel, and you can only be lost in a show for 30 minutes or 2 hours, So for me, it was, I taught myself how to write in Elvish. I took it very seriously.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I loved books. And so when I uncovered Velvet Elvis, it gave me permission to ask questions. And I think that was the first time in my entire life I had been taught that questioning was not the same as losing your faith. And for me, that was huge, because I never wanted to be that person who could be critiqued as not being faithful. I discovered Brene Brown a couple years ago, who is a type 1 on the Enneagram. And that's how my therapist actually promoted her to me, was she's a type 1 too. So you would probably like her. Well, the type 1 is all about reformer and doing what's right, being perceived as good instead of evil, right instead of wrong. And so I spent my whole life not wanting to look wrong or sound wrong. And I remember my best friend crying to me one day and being like, what kind of pressure you must be under? Because I would be like, I'm a reflection of Jesus. Like, everything I do is a reflection. So people see me, and every mistake I make, like, looks bad, like, on my faith and like on all the people I care about and my Savior. And like, it was just this, she was just heartbroken for me, because she's like, how you're trying to be perfect. I was like, well, as close to it as I can be. Like, I didn't even try to deny it. I'm like, well, isn't it in the Bible we're supposed to be perfect like Jesus was perfect? Like, yes, that's what I'm trying to do. And so obviously that's a lot of weight to carry. And over the course of many, many years, and finding my own church and going through divorce and feeling like an outcast once again, because nobody wanted me to volunteer. I wasn't allowed to volunteer for Young Life, because at the time I was working at a dispensary. And even though it's legal in Colorado, it was a hard line for churches to draw. So I wasn't allowed to volunteer for Young Life. I wasn't allowed to be a church leader for a small group at my church, because they asked 5 questions. And one of those were, what are your opinions on marijuana? And I said, why aren't you asking me about the Bible? Why does our pastor talk about the bourbon he drinks every week from the pulpit? Like, why are you asking this question? And then they never responded to me, and I never got asked to come be a leader. I tried to volunteer in every capacity and just got shut down and shut down and shut down and shut down. And so I started asking myself, what are the criteria then? What are they really looking for? They're looking for somebody who doesn't question, doesn't challenge the status quo, doesn't have a viewpoint that kind of encompasses anything that includes the world along with Christianity. And so it kind of felt like a line was being drawn in the sand, and I was trying to stand across both and be like, well, no, I see their point and I see their point. Why can't we just come together and discuss this? Like, and so I started emailing my pastor and they directed me to his son, who was younger than me, about 10 years younger than me, for all my theological questions. He had just graduated seminary school, and that was their theologian pastor. And so I started asking questions, and deep ones, and probably the most annoying ones, like, why did they stop using incense? Like, incense seemed like it was such a huge factor in the beginning church. It was even around in Jesus's day. And all of a sudden, like, if you mixed incenses, God would kill you. But then all of a sudden it doesn't matter anymore. It seems like a God who would have killed for that might have cared about it later on.
That's interesting.
So there was just different, like, he didn't have any answers. I realized quickly that there their response to what they didn't understand or a question that they hadn't heard before was to point to somebody else who had gotten a similar question and give a similar answer. And so I was constantly being pointed to this theologian or this theologian or this person or this person. And I think the last question I ever asked was, why were there extra chapters added to the book of Mark? And then, in some versions and not other versions, I was like, but still credited to Mark. And his response was something along the lines of, well, it agreed with the other gospels, so they kept it in there. And I'm like, wait, so we knowingly plagiarized? That sounds a little off to me. And that was where I was like, okay, I don't think I can trust my pastors to lead me, even though they're men and I'm supposed to defer to men. Which ended up being the step into my real deconversion, was what I call my sacred feminine awakening. I kind of think of my deconversion as a series of awakenings. And so I feel like that's probably why the conservative party or the Christian church in general has kind of taken a very negative stance against woke. And so it almost is triggering for me to hear that be referred to in a negative connotation, simply because it was such a positive for me over and over and over again. It was like, you would think that this is the aha moment that changes everything. And then I'd have another one 2 months later and I'd be like, but that changes everything. But that changes everything. And so it was just a series of awakenings. And the feminine awakening was the one where I was like, I have to draw a line in the sand here. Because I'm never going to be able to be a leader in this church. Women are never going to be respected to the extent that men are. I'm still being told that my husband is supposed to be my spiritual leader. He was an atheist when I met him. He is still not he still wasn't a Christian at the time. I'm like, he goes to church with me, but I'm supposed to let him lead me. It was just this, something doesn't feel right about giving away my intuition and my conversations with God to somebody else and say, you tell me what God is trying to tell me. After Rob Bell, I found Megan Watterson. She wrote Mary Magdalene Revealed, which was this new approach to praying that I had never heard of. And it was really just meditation, but she calls it the soul voice meditation. And through it was the first time I felt like I was hearing back. I felt like for 30 years, I had prayed to God and at God and thrown stuff out there, and never felt like I was really getting any kind of response. I was like, I might feel something. I think I'm getting an idea of what I'm supposed to do. Is this conviction? That I'm even thinking about it? Does that mean it's wrong? Constant, questions, but no answers. And through the soul voice meditation, I felt like I started to actually hear from God, personally, of, no, you're not broken. No, there's nothing wrong with you. No, I love you. In fact, the first time I went inward on a soul voice meditation, and this is going to sound pretty woo-woo, which is funny because Rob Bell just released an episode on the proper level of woo. It was, right. He's the best titler. I need to get a hold of him to title my book when I finish it. But it was, trying to visualize God, go to a safe place in your mind. For me, that was always a cabin in the woods that has taken different visualization form over the years, or over every time I go into my part. And while I was there, God appeared to me in my own face, which was really hard for me, because it was like, oh, I can't look at you like me. I can't. And all I heard back was, until you can see me in yourself, I'm going to come to you like this. And it was such a powerful, mind shifting, life shifting, oh, I am part of God already. And I didn't have to say a certain magic phrase to get there. I didn't have to be baptized. I didn't have to do a certain amount of things or become perfect. God has always been a part of me, and is this like connection that I made to, oh, God is in everything and everyone. And like, it's not like you can take God out of things or put God into things. God is all encompassing. And so it became this like much broader picture. And then I found myself trying to explain that to people and feeling like, oh, am I telling people that their idea of God was closed-minded? Kind of. I'm like, I only refer to God as he for 30 years. And that feels really closed-minded now. It definitely feels like God just got so much bigger. Like I let her out of the box, you know? It was just something that shifted in me that was, well, until I can see God in myself, then I'm not seeing God in the female body or in women. And then I got pregnant with my daughter and I found out I was having a girl. I have 3 older boys and I had already resigned myself to the fact that I was going to be a boy mom. This is my 4th boy. My grandma had 4 boys. I'm excited. And when we went in for the ultrasound, it was just shock. I wasn't even excited when she said girl. I was just like, you sure? I'm pretty sure I only do boys. Like this is not a thing for me. But something inside me started changing as she was growing and developing. And I started to come face to face with my own self-loathing and my own internal misogyny, honestly. I remember starting to like come up or remember like times in my life where I asked my mom if God liked boys more than girls. I started to come back to like this realization of you never felt equal in this religion. Is that what you want to do to your daughter? And a part of me feels guilty for never having that like moment with all 3 of my boys. My oldest son is now 20. So I had many years to kind of come to this, but it wasn't until she was developing inside of me that it was like, I want it to be different for her. Like I don't want to talk about my weight in front of her. I don't want to use Snapchat filters because I don't want her looking back for it. And it's a weird, morbid thought, but I was thinking of the pictures that would be chosen for me, like at my funeral, like, and if they would pull them off Instagram or Facebook at the time, and if they were all going to have filters on them. And I was like, everybody's going to be like, she looks like a different person in each picture. And that hit me hard. I was like, I cannot teach my daughter to love herself if I cannot learn to love myself. And so self-love became tied up in this feminine awakening. It became this interconnected. If you see yourself as holy, if you see yourself as being a part of God, you have to let all this shame go. And back to Brene Brown, like, thank you to my therapist, who I also started going to in 2020. Like it was a great year for me, honestly. Left church, started over, got therapy. But when she introduced me to Brene Brown's stuff on shame, I just realized that that's what my whole religion had been. My whole belief system had been based in, I'm worthless in and of myself, but Jesus died for me. And if I say these magic words, he will come to live inside of my heart. And all of a sudden I won't be worthless anymore. Not because of me, but because he's in me. Mm-hmm. So it was still, you're still worthless in and of yourself. And I wanted to change that and be like, no, you have worth in and of yourself. You being born, you being taking your first breath, like that is valuable in and of itself. And you have a lot to offer, whether you were born with these genitals or these genitals or these chromosomes or these chromosomes or how you identify. It has become it's a really learning journey of knowing how much I didn't know that I thought I knew and coming to the end of this quest of the answer is to not have the answers. I feel like my whole life has been about finding the answer, the truth. And now it's about, well, maybe there are many truths. Maybe there are many paths. Maybe there isn't just one way, and kind of reevaluating just my approach to everything, my holidays that I do with my family, the traditions that we hold, the clothing that we wear, from A to Z. It's just now all of a sudden this reframing. And I kind of think I'm coming out of my deconversion process. I'm well into the reconstruction of like, what do I want my life to look like now? What do I want to incorporate? What of Christmas do we take? I have a weird, probably perspective that maybe a lot of deconverted people that don't have, and that I still adore Jesus, who he was. I don't even know if he was real anymore. At this point, I'm like, I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it's any more or less relevant than learning lessons from the goddess Freya or from the goddess Isis or Kali. I'm like, it doesn't make any difference to me whether or not he was real. Who he was and what he spoke of was justice for the poor and the marginalized and not forgetting people. And that was the Jesus that I had fallen in love with. And so a part of me still holds on to that part of my faith, but I don't feel like that came from my faith. I look back at the church and my pastors and I'm like, they didn't have this idea of Jesus that I met. Like they had like this white Jesus, this like macho, like, my former pastor is all into military and MMA and UFC and is tatted and is very macho Jesus. He talks about not wanting to follow a wimpy Lord. And so it's definitely been one of those things where I had to come to terms with, this isn't the Jesus that you were taught, but it is the Jesus you discovered in the Bible. So you can't just say this whole book is evil and throw it all out because it introduced you to some really important truths. And that knowledge of being like, you can sift through and find truth and claim it. And you don't have to take anything at face value. You don't have to say, well, if you don't believe all of it, then you don't believe any of it. That was so critical for I would say my emotional awareness, my development of, or my understanding of myself, my understanding of my relationships with other people, like understanding that nothing is all or nothing. That's a fun one, right?
Yes, it is, because we are taught that everything's black or white. It's either good or evil. It's right or wrong, rather than being able to take from Buddhism or Shakespeare or Toni Morrison or great movies and just find your values and the things that you love and the things that you believe and piece it together. Because my dad has always been like that. My dad's never been a Christian. He's always just kind of, whatever he wanted to believe, he kind of pieced together. And I thought, how do you do that? Then you're clearly just creating your own religion. Well, now, where I am now, I'm convinced everyone just creates their own religion. And I'm like, actually, this is a great idea if it, not harming people. So no, that's awesome that you're able to, just find truth wherever truth is found.
Yeah. And that was actually in a Rob Bell quote, actually. I don't remember if it's a book or online, but he said once to affirm truth wherever you find it, because all truth is God's truth. And I remember bringing that up with my dad, who was definitely Rush Limbaugh, he ran for House of Representatives in the Republican Party against an incumbent Democrat and actually got like 35% of the vote in a very Democratic area. So it was very much so that our politics and religion went hand in hand. But then it was also like telling him about, hey, we can affirm all truth is God's truth, right? If you search for the truth, it will find you, right? And he would be like, well, yeah, I've never really thought about it that way, but that opened a door. So then I could be like, what do you think of this truth? And then tell him where I got it from. And it was like not necessarily a biblical truth, but he would be like, yeah, that's true. Like I can recognize that and I've watched him change. And I think that him changing more than any other person in my life has shown me that it's possible. That somebody who was the most hardcore, like fundamentalist, like Christian that I could think of, even vocally anti-feminist. And now today I would say he's beside me. He still calls himself Christian, but he doesn't go to church. He doesn't like to, be, identified in the group of American churchgoers. He talks about a different kind of Christianity, the Christianity that follows the real Jesus. And it sounds like somewhere in there, he began to see this like shift in, okay, this isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't right. And actually acted on it instead of just staying in the church, because I would watch my parents stay in a church long after it was, being abusive to them. One church wouldn't allow women to pray a lead prayer in Bible study. And they would stay through that, but then ended up leaving because they got a divorce, and my dad was asked to step down from teaching because once you're divorced, you're no longer able to teach. Suddenly all your Bible knowledge goes out the window. So there was just different, watching him at 65 years old, like twist and change and morph into this beautiful, like human being who sees like the need for social justice in addition to love your neighbor, and seeing those as being the same, really, and being one is an act of love and one is not, just voicing it. So I definitely, I have hope for society. And so I keep talking to people, even if they think I'm crazy, or I've had most of my Christian friends and family kind of shun me at this point, or tell me, I know what side you're on. And I'd be like, wait, we haven't had this discussion yet. How do you know what side I'm on? But it was just well, we're here and you're here. And so no matter what the topic is, you've already your side is already picked. Like, you have to pick one of these two. And I just kept rejecting that and rejecting that and rejecting that and being like, no, that's not how this works. I'm a human being and I get to make a choice every time. Like, not just I'm pigeonholed into picking one or the other because of my faith. And I wanted my world to get bigger, not smaller, through my reconstruction. And it's been a lot of fun. The holidays scare the crap out of me. It's, I feel like I have nothing to do. Like, when it comes around to, we're trying to change Christmas into Yule, and looking what does that look like? Do we still acknowledge Jesus's birthday? We know it wasn't in December, but we're not celebrating it any other time. Like, do we still acknowledge it? You know, is the Bible something I do want to read with my kids at some point? Probably not all of it. I'm like, there's a lot of parts that I'm like, that was not kid appropriate ever. And I'm not sure. I was given the Bible reading as punishment sometimes. It would be like, go to your room and read a gospel. So I learned Mark was the shortest gospel, which is why I noticed that there was chapters added to it.
Oh, that's funny.
But yeah, I mean, reading the Bible was what set me free. Honestly, it got me asking so many questions that things didn't add up. And I fell in love with history. And I fell in love with like trying to figure out, where does this piece in with what was happening in Asia at the time, what was happening in Africa at the time? Like, how does it all tie in to the bigger world picture? So I could see what was happening instead of narrowing in on, 9/11 and thinking, what was happening in other parts of the world in 2001. It's just one of those things where I don't think we do it very often if we're not taught to do it. And psychology taught me how to think critically. They had a research methods class. It was always about challenge your sources. Where are you getting that from? Did you get it from Wikipedia? Because it was right after the internet had come out. Like, you can't just pull things from here or here. We need, peer-reviewed articles. So we're going to do real science. And I began to fall in love with the scientific method. The idea of proving yourself right by proving yourself wrong, by trying to prove yourself wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to do that with my life and kind of just be like, how sure am I of this? Can I prove it wrong? Because if I can't, then it kind of like confirms my bias, but it's like, there could be something else that comes up later that throws that out. And all of a sudden you're just like, well, now what? Like, now I don't know what to think anymore. Back to Rob Bell, he actually once, what did he use? He used the metaphor of a trampoline versus a brick wall. So he said, you can either build your belief system out of a wall and you pull out a brick and the whole thing crumbles. Or you can look at it more like a trampoline, and it's springy and it's adaptable and you can have fun with it and you can enjoy the ride. And I just remember thinking, I would much rather have the trampoline than the wall. Like, I want to have a springy like attitude towards life. I want to be adaptable and I want to be open-minded. And it's something I always thought I was. And even my husband like tells me, yeah, you were really open-minded for a Christian. You definitely changed my mind about them. You definitely made me see that I was putting them all in one category and saying they're all the same people that, were cursing out girls saying they were going to hell for wearing short miniskirts at my college in Florida. Like, cause that was his idea of Christians are the ones with signs at your college, telling all the girls they're going to hell. And so when he met me, I spent my, first 2-3 years trying to change his mind about me and then being like, wait, I think he's kind of right about me in some ways. Like, I think that there are certain things that are just very closed-minded, very unadaptable. I'm still thinking I'm right. I'm still hoping he's going to convert. I'm still believing that my influence on him is stronger than his influence on me. So am I really open-minded, or am I just open enough to make it seem like I'm listening?
Oh, I need to pay attention to that, because I can find myself in conversations similarly, no longer a Christian, no longer a believer in anything supernatural, but wanting to ask questions that maybe can get the other person to think, rather than just letting them be where they are, and like still being an evangelical just for something completely different. Like, does that make sense? Yeah. The fundamentalism and the evangelizing, those kinds of behaviors and ways of thinking are hard to kick, because for you were in it way longer than I ever was. Like, it's a lot to get rid of.
I saw the most convicting meme, I think, or post on Instagram the other day. And it was about how is your fundamentalist upbringing still playing into your deconversion? And so it says, are you trying to pull people out of the church the same way that you tried to pull them into the church? And I'm not going to lie, the first year of my deconversion, I was tagging my former church and my former pastor in almost every one of my posts and being like, this is flat irons. This is them. This is who they are. This is the man series. Like, this is sexism. This is patriarchy. And just trying to like convince people that it was a cult. And I'm like, you learned something there though. You spent 9 years and you didn't learn nothing. Like, so you got something out of it. What if they're getting something out of it? And so I'm like, okay, well, is there a right way to warn people about what they're getting into? So it's kind of I started listening to this new podcast, Sounds Like a Cult, and they have 3 cult categories. And one of them is, live your life and then watch your back and then get the F out. And so the beginning of my deconversion was that get the F out and take everybody with you. It's dangerous. It's going to destroy the world. Like, they're making these misogynists out of just whole legions of young boys in youth group. I watched my son get targeted on online by all these like misogynist groups. His whole youth group is very I would say the worst like influence on him that I could have probably imagined. But it was just an anger period that I had to work through, a whole lot of anger. And Sumant Kid describes that in The Dissident Daughter, about years of anger. And that is why that book spoke to me so deeply, of trying to let yourself like feel angry and allow yourself to feel angry and then do something about it. And so I loved her approach, and being, I'm going to surround myself with the sacred feminine, kind of try to balance this imbalance. For me, that has been step 1 of deconversion, is like relating to God in the feminine, before I can go to God is genderless, God is bigger. And so it's kind of one of those, I spent 30 years here. Like, I would like to spend a couple of years loving her, getting to know her, and then getting to know something even bigger. My son is already kind of there, my 17-year-old. I feel like he like just bypassed like all of it. And it kind of makes me jealous sometimes to be like, how did you just know? Like, how did you just know? I raised you in the church too. Like, how did you just know this was just a bunch of crock? Like, it just seems like he knew innately like what was right, what was true for him. It was just like, I like that, but I don't like that. And I'm just not going to do that. And I don't believe that, but that's okay for you. And I was just like, well, I did something right, at least, like maybe my kids will do better than I did. I'm still trying to undo all of that here. But he's already got this idea of calling it source or absolute. So many different names out there. I think I find a different one in every book I read, whether it's like on Zen or Buddhism or quantum healing. Is just, I feel like science has a name for God, like we have a name, Allah or Muslims have a name. So it's just all these different names for the same source that is just something other. For me, it is just something other than myself that has well intentions for me. And I think that has been the source of my self-love healing journey of establishing a sense of worth, of rebuilding who I think I am. When I met my husband, I told him, if you don't learn anything about God and my faith, because I told him, how do you have a critique on a book you never read? He said he would never read the Bible. And I just told him early on that if you think that you know me, you cannot without knowing my faith. Like, it is so entwined in who I am that I don't know who I am without it. And so now redefining myself as, well, is it still faith? It is in a sense, but is it so core to who you are that you don't know who you are without it? So when I get to the part of supplying a bio to people or online, or for my literary agents trying to get a book published, it's like, well, I don't want to start with I am this or I am that. I'm like, these are just roles I play. Like, how do I figure out who I am? I'm like, knowledge seeker. And then I'm like, well, if you were a part of God, then all the knowledge is already there. So even if that identity was taken from you, if you could not seek, who are you at the core? And that has been what the last 6 months has been about, just trying to figure that part out and being like, I don't know anymore, but I don't think that that's the answer, is to arrive at a conclusion. Because I think if I concluded who I am at 38, then by the time I'm 58, I'm going to have to undo all that.
You'll be a completely different person then. Like, there may be, I think about one of the things that was, I guess, shocking. I don't know if that's the right word. For my husband and me, he deconverted before I did. And that sent me on a journey to figure out, okay, what do I believe? And now we're both in similar places. But it was like our values didn't change. We were so surprised because being Christian had been such an integral part of both of our lives for so many years. And then when we realized we can't believe this stuff anymore, but it was but our values are still the same: compassion, empathy, kindness, justice, wisdom. Where are you now as far as what your beliefs are about supernatural? For me, I've read the Brene Brown and the Sue Monk Kid, and they've all been so good for me. But I've kind of landed in a place where I don't believe in the supernatural stuff. But what do you believe now about source or universe or any of those kinds of words? I guess about God in general, your definition, if you have one. Yeah.
So I've grown to dislike the word God kind of in general. Mm-hmm. I prefer goddess right now, simply because it feels more, I feel like God has so much attached to it already. And when I think the word God, I think a white man in heaven.
Yes, it's hard to disconnect that from, I understand.
And I think that kind of rings true whether you were raised in any faith or not. It's kind of, you hear the word God and it's kind of been taken over. And so I try to avoid that word at all costs. I think my journey actually kind of led me full circle. When I was about 14, 15, I began to explore Wicca. And I remember falling in love with the idea of God being represented through nature and feeling well, that's the only place I ever feel there's something bigger than me here. I feel this awe and wonder and this stirring in me that connects me to everything else in nature. And so I go to the mountains on hikes every month because it's my fill back up with goddess. And so when I was studying Wicca, my parents obviously freaked out. Oh my God, it's our worst nightmare. Our daughter is becoming a witch. But there was one hang up for me, and that was in Wiccan religion. They focus on a goddess instead of a god. They focus on the sacred feminine instead of the masculine. And I remember thinking at 15, 16 years old, well, but I know God is Jesus, so I know God is a man. And I could never allow myself to be a part of any ritual or any ceremony that said goddess. I would change it to God.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was this aversion to seeing God in the feminine that kind of made me walk away from Wicca for a long time. And in my adult life, I've come across a lot of books that kind of brought me back to, I wouldn't say Wiccan anymore, because I would say that's one branch, just like evangelical is one branch of Christianity. I consider myself an eclectic witch at this point, witch in the sense that I didn't necessarily become one so much as remember who I am as a woman. I think witches were the healers. They were the midwives. They were the wise women. And I feel like that is our birthright as women. And because our stories haven't been told, it's been his story instead of her story for so long that it's going to sound like a side trail real quick. But have you ever read The Red Tent by Anita Diamant?
No, I have lots of people who've loved it, but I've never read it.
It's about Dinah, so the only daughter of Jacob, and her experience as a woman in her culture and the birth of the Israelites and her perspective of how not great these men were. But it talks about this red tent where women would sit during their cycles, and because it all syncs up in the same village, they would all sit there for a few days and talk to each other. And that was how women's stories were passed down. And so I had this heartbreaking moment, and I think it was in Dance of the Dissident Daughter, where I realized there was this break where women who didn't have daughters had nobody to pass it down to. So there was just storyline lost and lost and lost and lost. And so we don't know the stories of these wise women or these witches that were able to use their power, tap into nature, their own cyclic nature, and be like, oh, I can read when this cow is going to give birth, or I can tell you, what herbs are going to work for this. And it just became a discrediting of ourselves, and in the beginning of the taking of our power. And so by using the word witch, for me, that is just reclaiming my power. So I know it has a lot of connotation to a lot of people, and it can mean a lot of different things. For me, I'm more of the eclectic witch in the sense that I take from different ideas. I like the gardening is like my favorite thing, mostly retouching nature. I'm also vegan. So I think the connection to nature has always been there for me. It's been something that I used to beg my church to recognize, hey, why is he still talking about hunting or eating chicken wings in heaven? I'm really hoping that we're not slaughtering animals by the billions in heaven. It's just, I really feel like we'll get past this someday. If we can start to see all life as valuable. And so I feel like I was already there. I just didn't know what to call myself. And so I still believe in a supernatural in the sense that I believe that when I use my tarot deck, it's like doing the soul voice meditation, but getting a clearer answer, because I can doubt myself. When I do this soul voice meditation, I can be like, was it really me talking to myself? But was that my intuition or was that my head? Because my head is kind of crazy. I have all sorts of thoughts that go on up here. And so I'm trying to ask, questions and get answers. And I'm like, well, I got an answer, but I don't trust it. And so I'll pull out my tarot deck and then I'll get an answer that's like, yes, trust yourself. And I'm like, okay, right.
Yes.
So I feel like I do get answers from something outside of myself. And that's kind of my idea of supernatural at this point. That, and I do believe in multiple lives, reincarnation. I don't necessarily believe that they're all human. I don't even necessarily believe they're all on Earth. And I don't believe that time is linear necessarily. I don't know if, some of my past lives are yet to happen. I don't think that that's the point. I feel like whatever lessons I'm learning here on Earth are lessons that I didn't get to in a past life. And so when I see somebody struggling with something over and over and over again, the woman who accused Emmett Till of rape passed away today. And my first thought was, she's going to have to come back and learn that lesson of racism. Like, she's going to have to come back as somebody who suffers, or somebody who loses somebody, like, or somebody who, has to like just face this somehow, because in my idea of the afterlife, and a lot of this is formed, by a near-death experience I had when I was 4, and also, reading up on other people's near-death experiences because of my experience. I watched the show called Life After Death, by Tyler Henry on Netflix. And he talks about how people still grow after they're gone. We don't just stop our growth cycle. We're still growing as spirits. And so that to me was something that I held on to, because it felt like there's so much that has been passed on and passed on and passed on from people not healing. And you see it in epigenetics with the African Americans holding on to more stress levels in their bodies because of their past. And I feel that women have some reckoning to do with the witch burning and kind of genocide on women, that was never really talked about, or never really even reported on. Like, numbers were really not written. The people who did write about it were men. Like, the things that we don't know are what I feel like my new mission in life has become, of getting people to tell their stories. I find myself buying people journals all the time of like, Dad, tell me your story. Mom, tell me your story. And it's like, tell us your story. And it has like prompts and everything. But I'm just like, I'm not letting one more person go without hearing what they have to offer, because I feel like we're missing out on the everyday perspectives and getting the good writers' perspectives. And I just want to have a history that encompasses men and women, and all cultures. And I want it to be, moving towards a better earth. So I feel like my spiritual idea or practice today is that this earth can become heaven here. I don't know if that's something that has already happened in the past and comes back around, and it's a circle that we just keep repeating. I like to tell people we are God's evolution. Our evolution is part of God's evolution. As we are growing, God is growing. Like, we are becoming more compassionate, and we are caring more about every person. Like, we're not going back. And no matter how much certain groups of people want us to, like, we're not willing to go back to being second-class citizens. We're not willing to go back to the way things were. We want a world that is more inclusive to everybody. And that, I think, is my idea of God and heaven, and this interconnectedness of like realizing that my healing is your healing, and that my hurt is your hurt. And then once that happens, there's no identifying this as right or wrong or good or bad, or it's just, well, if that hurt you, then it hurt me, and I don't want to do that to you. So just a simpler way of living. And for my kids, I feel like I have to make the world a better place than when I entered it. Just make sure that I am not leaving my daughter in worse hands after Roe v. Wade being overturned than she was going into it. Fortunately, I live in Colorado, so I have a lot of protections in place for me here. But my sister lives in Texas, and I have, friends all over the country. And I'm like, I'm not willing to let anyone go. I'm not willing to let anybody be oppressed without saying something about it. And so, the racial awakening was the other, huge part of my deconversion that actually was my nail in the coffin of like, leave this church now and never come back. Mm-hmm. Was right after George Floyd. Our church pretended like they were going to talk about it. They did one sermon on race, and they had their young pastor, obviously the pastor's son-in-law, because he stays in the family. But they got him to get up there and give a speech about race and how racism has no place in the church, and got a huge pushback online. And that was where I got called a terrorist for being a Black Lives Matter protester, and started to hear the words critical race theory and have people like come at me with this stuff. And my response was, I don't know what that is, but I do know what racism looks like. And I do know what it looks like when people are treated horribly, because I was married to a Black man. I was with him since I was 14 years old. I got pulled over when we were together and he got a ticket and I didn't, though I was driving. Like, there were different things that I would witness personally, and nobody would believe my stories. And it became this, like gaslighting scenario. I felt just completely gaslit by the church. Like, they were saying, no, we don't see race. No, we don't see race. And so the following week, the main pastor got up and said, we are not going to be that church that talks about race. And he said, and if you think we need to defend the police, read Romans 13. And that was the last sermon I ever listened to. And I was like, I can't be here. My kids depend on me. They depend on me standing up for them, because they are kind of being brainwashed in your youth group to think that they're going to be treated like all their white peers. But if they get pulled over, guess who's going to jail first? It's my kid, not your kid. And so it was just this kind of heartbreak at realizing that even the people that I had grown up with didn't believe me or trust my opinion or thought that I was making a political statement by saying, no, Black Lives Matter, because I had been saying it long before, like back when Trayvon Martin was murdered in 2012. Yeah. So I had been saying it for so long that by the time it like really picked up in the light of Elijah McClain and George Floyd in Colorado, it became this, you're just jumping on the bandwagon kind of idea. And I'm like, oh no, but these are my children. Like, I've been saying their lives matter since day one. I've been calling out racists in the parking lot at their schools. Like, I have been on this, but I had been alone in this. I thought that the church, if they knew, would be like, oh, what? Like, and that's actually what started my page, the Dissident Daughters page. It was, if people only knew this, like maybe it would shift a perspective. And I was like, well, how do I share that? I can't just keep giving out books to people. This gets expensive. And 99% of the time they don't read it, or they get annoyed with me. And I'm like, you don't have to read. I'm just giving you a free book. Like, for me, that's like the best gift you could give me. Right. I was like, I didn't realize it would be so offensive or a to-do list for people. And so that like became okay, so you can't reach out to people to give them stuff, because then you're like targeting them. What if you created this other page? And I was too worried about my parents finding out that I wasn't Christian anymore yet. So I kind of created an anonymous page that was separate from my personal page, and it's funny because everybody had already stopped following my personal page already, because it was Black Lives Matter for 4 years.
Yep. No, I totally get it. A few people have asked, like, because on Facebook, I'm like super anti-racist heifer and anti-religious heifer on Facebook. And they're like, how does your family respond to your, like, the things that you write about being an atheist? And I'm like, in 2014, when I first started waking up to the racism in the United States and I attacked whiteness, they quit following me. Like, they're not seeing anything that I'm writing. When I attacked the one true God of white Christianity, they stopped paying attention a long time ago. I was like, so they probably don't even see anything that I write. So I understand. Yeah. They quit.
It's ironic too, because my mother like grew up, she bought hook, line, and sinker the idea of being submissive to your husband and living under him, and, quit her job and was taking care of her kids and being a good housewife. And until she hit her, late 30s, early 40s, and had her, Brene Brown calls it her spiritual awakening, and other people call it a breakdown. And my mom's form was definitely the worst way you could do it, turn to alcohol and affair and leave. And so it was kind of it's all or nothing. It's either you're all in or you're all out. And now she's all in again. And so now it's just, I'm praying for my grandchildren. Please let my grandchildren go to church. You wouldn't keep them, out of heaven, would you? And it was like, well, Mom, I'm not afraid of hell anymore. I stopped believing in that. So when you're not afraid of something, that doesn't work as well. I'm like, wow, manipulation 101.
Yes. Some kids on the playground told my older son that, like, well, your family's going to go to hell if you don't believe in God. He goes, what? But we don't believe in hell, so we don't really care. Like, he's like, whatever. As we wrap up, MJ, is there anything that I did not ask that you want to mention?
No, I think I kind of went in circles a little bit. I'm still writing out my story because it's hard to tell where it, really starts. I feel like I've been on a deconversion program since I was 4 and fell out of a window. and it's like that near-death experience, like, convinced me that there is something bigger than me, but it also reminded me that I wasn't going to get answers from the people around me because they didn't know either. And so that search is where I think that you keep searching and you keep searching and you keep searching and you'll find your way right out of it.
Yes. And it is wonderful to be in a place where I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. Like, there doesn't have to be a right answer. There doesn't have to be a wrong answer. There doesn't even have to be an answer. It can be like, I don't know. And I'll keep looking or I'll stay where I am, but you don't have to have any answers, and you don't have anything to prove. Anybody you have to make feel a certain way so that they know that you believe this or that. And those are good things. Do you have any book, podcasts, YouTube, any kind of recommendations that, and I know you have book recommendations, but like we will direct everyone to your Instagram page. But yeah, any recommendations that have been just super helpful to you in your deconversion journey?
Absolutely. I would say We Can Do Hard Things by Glennon Doyle, Abby Wambach, and her sister Amanda Doyle.
The podcast, right? It's a podcast, right?
Yeah, the podcast, along with the I Weigh podcast by Jamila Jalil. Those two, for the last year, I have been going through my LGBTQ awareness, and realizing that I had no trans friends and being like, I don't understand their perspective in life. I need to know more. And so these podcasts have opened my eyes to perspectives. They're people I don't even know their names, and hearing their perspectives has been so fascinating and so mind blowing that I'm just like, how am I just discovering this now? And how did I think that I had a good idea from all the books that I've read of different personalities when I'm learning that there's a whole group of people out there that have never shared, and their stories are the most fascinating.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
Right now, it's just the Instagram, Dissident _Daughters. And from there, I am working on finishing up my book this year. We'll see if that ever gets published. I may just publish it myself. We'll see. But that's going to be kind of just an in-depth story of my life. I feel like I've got a lot of things that I relate to different groups of people that usually are on opposite sides of the aisles, and hoping that my book brings a perspective that some people see themselves in.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your story, MJ. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Arlene. Have a great day.
My final thoughts on the episode. MJ's amazing reading life that she shares on her page, Dissident Daughters, has been highly influential in the things that I've read over the past few years. And I think her story, if we as Graceful Atheists podcast listeners, if we can not dismiss her story because of words like witch or divine feminine or supernatural, source, universe, all that stuff. Her story is so similar to so many other people's stories. We're often raised with this black and white thinking where there's no nuance. There's only good and evil, right and wrong. It's filled with shame and purity culture and an inability to trust ourselves. Because we're explicitly taught we can't trust ourselves. We cannot trust ourselves. We have to trust people outside of us to interpret what truth is. And I think just realizing how much nuance there is in life, how much we can learn from religions, from spirituality, from rituals and traditions, what we can learn from women, because the atheist world is not exempt from misogyny or white supremacy. And so, yeah, just being willing to hear her story and how much it resonated with me, because I have read Sue Monk Kidd's The Dance of the Dissident Daughter. I did go through a time where I was like, I don't know if I believe in God, but I want God to be something more feminine than what I have believed for so long. And I needed to go through that. I feel like I needed to go through that. And now, like, for me, I'm an atheist. I don't believe there are supernatural things in the world. I need more evidence than people's stories. However, there is so much value in people's stories, so much value in the ancient stories, the ancient myths. And I hope we can be open to hear that. And MJ, thank you again for being on the podcast, and keep up all the amazing work that you're doing on Instagram. And I'm excited that you're writing a book. I love it.
The Secular Grace thought of the week is about trying to prove yourself wrong. My favorite part about this conversation with MJ was when she talked about the scientific method and attempting to prove yourself wrong. This is so counterintuitive to humans. We want to find corroborating evidence. We want to find things that line up with what we already believe. As MJ captured in this quote, I started asking myself, what are the criteria? What are the church leaders really looking for? They're looking for somebody who doesn't question, doesn't challenge the status quo, doesn't have a viewpoint that encompasses anything that includes the world along with Christianity. We were in such a bubble that had no countervailing information or evidence. And when we come out the other side and experience the world as it is, we can still take with us that need to only consume information that agrees with our existing opinions. The hard part is reaching out and finding information with which we disagree. It doesn't mean that we accept that entirely, but it does challenge the way we think. Trying to disprove ourselves or to prove ourselves wrong is healthy and a significant way to grow. Next week, I interview Amanda. That's going to be an amazing conversation. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. The beat is called Waves by Mackay Beats. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast.